This week on World Traveler Cooking, we are going to make pepparkakor. These are gingerbread cookies from Sweden. They're a little different from the Lebkuchen we made last week. But before you begin, please note, this recipe requires that the dough rest in the refrigerator for at least 24 hours. So, if you're in a hurry, make Lebkuchen instead. But this is a great recipe for other cases. And this has a great set of flavors associated. So, onto ingredients. We have around 530 grams or about 4 cups of flour with a tablespoon of baking soda or sodium bicarbonate. In Germany they call it Kaiser Natron on top. Then we have around 300 grams of I'm using a full raw sugar. You could use a brown sugar, you could even use a white sugar. Doesn't really matter. We have 150 milliliters, that's like 2/3 of a cup of basically, I would suggest using molasses. I ended up basically mixing some of this with water and heating it up to make a syrup. In Sweden they use something called syrup. Syrup. I guess, yeah, it'd be syrup. Syrup. In Sweden they use something called syrup. And syrup, I think, is basically beet molasses. So I would suggest using that. I've seen recipes suggest using dark corn syrup instead. We have, similarly, 150 milliliters of heavy cream, 200 grams of butter. We have 2 tablespoons, or about 30 grams, of powdered sugar. And then we have our spice mixture. So, lifting it up for you to see, we have about a tablespoon of ground cardamom, and I just ground this myself, about a tablespoon of cinnamon, about a tablespoon of ginger, and about half a tablespoon, so that's like, 1.5 teaspoons of cloves. So those will be our spices, and that's basically it. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just actually going to reuse the same pan that I used to make the syrup. But basically what we're going to do is we are going to add the butter. We are going to add the sugar, both kinds of sugar. And we're going to add the syrup to the pan. We're going to warm up everything until everything's melted. Okay, and once it's all melted together, then we're going to add it into a big bowl and we're going to start mixing it. You can use a food processor, or in this case I'm going to use a hand mixer. You can see right off the bat how thick everything is. It'll be interesting to see what happens as the butter melts and how well it incorporates. So let's go ahead and watch. So you can see that as the butter's melting, it's actually incorporating into this mixture very well. So I'm just going to leave it until it's all liquid, which may be another couple minutes, and then we will start making the dough. Now, once we make the dough, basically to make the dough, we are going to mix in the cream and herbs into this sauce, and then we are going to mix in the flour and bicarbonate. And here, this is looking pretty good. Look how well incorporated that is. Oh, a little bit of butter not incorporated yet. Let's keep this going. We'll turn off the heat. And this does not think this could use just a little more heat. Well, maybe just a little bit more stirring. So now we have this really thick syrup. Going to remove it from the heat, and we start adding it to a bowl. So next, we're going to take this, we're going to pour it into our bowl. And then we are going to pour in our spices. This is fairly easy, just dump. And then we're going to pour in our cream. I'm going to pour in just a bit at first. Mix to incorporate. And then I'm going to stir the rest in slowly. And here is the liquid base for our Pepparkakor. Now the flour. So I'm going to use dough hooks for this. And I'm just going to stir this on like this. Yep, works fine. Add all of our flour and turn this on. So at the end, this is what it looks like. We have kind of somewhere between a very soft dough and a very thick batter. And then we're going to set this in the refrigerator to set for 24 hours. And I expect that like sugars will crystallize, etc. during that time. And when we come back, I would expect that we'd have something that would be an actual heavy dough rather than this sort of thick batter. So we'll be back after at least 24 hours. So now it's been a little over 24 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and just make a batch of this. I have a lot of this dough, so we want to take this out about an hour before we're ready to cook it. And we're going to roll it out on a floured area. You can see that this is now a very pliable but slightly sticky dough. And we're going to roll it thin, and then we're going to cut it. I don't have any cookie cutters, and I couldn't find any at the store, so we may just do this in like squares or something. So I've rolled this really thin. It's like probably a millimeter or so. I'm just going to do some, just going to use a cup to make some circles. Now, the most traditional shape for this in Sweden is probably the heart. So now that these have been out of the refrigerator for about an hour, or the dough's been out of the refrigerator for an hour, it's time to put it in the oven. So I'm going to bake it for 5 minutes at 200 Celsius, that's 400 Fahrenheit. So now these have baked for about 5 minutes. You could see if I were to lift this up that they're actually pretty soft. So we're going to let these cool in the pan. If you try to move them to a rack, it's going to be a problem. So let them cool in the pan, come back once they're cool, and then we'll do a taste test. So I'm guessing maybe an hour, hour and a half. And now for the taste test. So the texture here is still just a little soft. Cookie is very thin. The spice profile is amazing. This is full of flavor. It's sweet, but it's absolutely delicious. So, this is a great approach to gingerbread. I hope you like it. I hope I've earned a like and a subscription from you. And check out my Patreon page where you can find various videos which have not been released yet, as well as cooking tips and things like that. Many of the cooking tips don't even require a subscription. So, recipes in the description. Bon appetit, and see you next week.